Dr. Carl Sagan, are we as a people of the United States, helping or hurting our environment?
Well, there's no question we're hurting. As a sort of natural consequence of industrialization, the exponential increase in our numbers, we are despoiling the environment. So it's not a yes-no question. The question is, how much should we alter the environment? And there are aesthetic factors involved, but the key question is survival. Surely we should not alter the environment to the extent that we ourselves are in trouble as a result. And you might go further than that and say other animals and plants should be preserved and so on. A good example is greenhouse warming, in which we are pouring huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're the worst CO2 polluter on the planet by a long shot. And that is increasing the global temperature and causing, on the time scale of the next century, a set of very serious consequences. Now, all the major Western European industrial nations, Japan and many other countries, have set themselves a set of limits. By such and such a date, we're going to cut our CO2 emissions by such and such an amount. The United States refuses to do so. So not only are we the worst culprit, we're the one least interested in changing our profligate ways.
We have heard over the past few years, though, Congress and the administration saying that something would be done about it. Last year, Congress passed and the administration signed a Clean Air Act. Will that make a difference? Is it a step in the right direction?
Sure.
Is it enough?
Sure, it's a step in the right direction. No, it's not enough. And on the issue that I just raised, greenhouse warming, it does essentially nothing. It doesn't address the issue. So, President Bush had a lot of rhetoric about being the environmental president, just as he did about being the education president. But beyond words, there's not much sign of any serious intent to fix these serious problems.
The argument is at the White House that you can only go so far because if you go beyond that point, you're going to hurt the country economically. You're going to lose jobs. What do you think of that argument?
Well, it's always used as an argument to make no changes whatever. Any change will lose jobs. So, for example, the A-12, the Navy fighter that was just canceled because it was absurdly over its cost estimates. There will be thousands of aerospace workers who will lose their jobs. Is that a good reason to pour additional billions of dollars into this rat hole? No, it's not. And if we were really concerned about losing jobs, we would have a federal job retraining program. We would have much better education at all levels in science and technology so people could move from one job to another. But we're not interested in that. The losing job argument is just trotted out for political convenience so that we don't have to make a change. No question, there are massive changes needed. Other countries seem perfectly able to make those changes, but we are not.
Some of those other countries appear to be, though, in deep trouble. Now with the opening of Eastern Europe, we find that these former communist countries have tremendous environmental problems.
No question. Those weren't the countries I had in mind.
Right, but I mean, when you look at the total mix, the world, how much does that hurt us as a planet?
Well, the kind of problems we're talking about in Eastern Europe are desperately bad, but they're local. Despoiling, ravaging of the environment. I mean, desolate stretches of Eastern Europe where nothing grows and nothing probably will grow for a long time into the future. But that's not the planet. That's just Eastern Europe. Bad enough, of course. But what I'm saying is there are certain categories of problems, of which greenhouse warming is one, ozonosphere, the depletion of the protective ozone layer is another, and nuclear winter is a third, in which the consequences are worldwide, long-term, and extremely serious. And then there are more local problems as well. And we have to solve all of those problems, but at least in terms of the global issues, like greenhouse warming and nuclear winter, the United States is not doing a good job. On the ozone layer, we have done not just a creditable job, but a even heroic job, um, a which we should be very proud of. But on these other issues, we're doing not well at all.
Where do we stand? I want to ask you specifically about the greenhouse effect and nuclear winter. Where do we stand now on the greenhouse effect and what it would apparently eventually do, raise the ocean levels?
Well, it's something like this. You burn fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas. The world economy runs on that right now. And as a consequence, you put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon in the coal combines with the oxygen of the air and makes carbon dioxide, CO2, releasing energy. That's why we do it. Our technology has now gotten to such an awesome level that we are able to put so much of this stuff, CO2 and other greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere that we're changing the composition of the air and changing its radiative properties. We're now keeping heat in, the temperatures are rising. Nobody knows precisely when it will be that things get a certain level of bad. But what I believe is very clear is that we continue doing things this way and things are going to get very bad. Very bad means temperatures rise, increasing drought in continental interiors, as you say, sea level rising, flooding of coastal areas and islands, and no cutoff. All this continuing indefinitely until one way or another we stop. That's serious.
How bad could it get? Because I think all of us have seen at one time or another maps and where the current geography, and then if the ocean were to rise 3, 4, whatever feet, it's a dramatically different outlook.
Yeah. So the further into the future you want to project, the worse that becomes. The kind of things that are serious prospects for maybe the end of the next century are, for example, the flooding of Bangladesh. Tens of millions of people live in Bangladesh. You have tens of millions of environmental refugees. Where are they supposed to go? You have islands in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean which just are going to disappear. It's a serious problem.
The other topic I'd like to cover is nuclear winter, which you have a new book out. And where do we stand there?
Well, this book called A Path Where No Man Thought, Nuclear Winter and the End of the Arms Race, has just come out. I wrote it with Richard Turco.
And it is in the bookstores now.
It's in the bookstores all over the country. He's an atmospheric scientist at UCLA. And we've been involved since 1982 in this accidental discovery that large climatic changes are likely to follow from even a small nuclear war, if such a thing is possible. And the basic idea is that clouds of sooty, dark sooty smoke rise over the burning cities and the burning petroleum facilities, merge, spread first in longitude, then in latitude, cover almost all of the northern hemisphere, slip over to some extent into the southern hemisphere. Sunlight can't get through. The surface of the Earth becomes darker, and the temperatures drop because, after all, it's sunlight which is warming the surface. And the temperatures seem, for a wide range of scenarios, to drop so much that there's massive failure of agriculture. Crops die. And an estimate made a few years ago, massive study by 300 scientists worldwide under the auspices of the International Council of Scientific Unions, predicts that billions of people would die of starvation. That means that nuclear winter is by far the greatest threat to our global civilization and to our species. If there weren't such an obscene number of nuclear weapons in the world, it wouldn't be so serious. But because you only need a few hundred nuclear warheads to burn a few hundred cities to make something like nuclear winter go, and the United States and the Soviet Union have 55,000 nuclear weapons, the disparity is so great as to suggest a very dangerous situation. And one of the conclusions of this book is an attempt to show how massive reductions in the nuclear arsenals could increase the security of the nations involved, retain the posture of strategic deterrence, will have enough weapons to prevent the other side from using their weapons, and make the likelihood of nuclear winter, if not vanish, become very small.
Right now, there are two factors, I think, that, as far as nuclear weapons, can cause a great deal of possible change in the future. One, of course, is the conflict in the Persian Gulf, where we could be facing war, and we don't know how limited that war might be if it does indeed happen. The other is the changes in the Soviet Union, where that, again, is not clear. You could have individual states with their own nuclear weapons, in theory, and the army, say, controlling it instead of the central government. How much does that worry you, if it does?
It does. Both of those are very serious issues, nuclear winter or no nuclear winter. I'll come specifically to that in just a moment, but let me just make a more general statement. If we were to be complacent about this issue, we were to say, well, the Cold War is over, so what are we worrying about? Then, in effect, we are saying that we are confident in the sanity and sobriety of all leaders, military and civilian, of all nuclear-armed nations from now to the end of time. And nobody can be sure of that. This is the century of Hitler and Stalin. Even the United States has had leaders in living memory who have shown serious instabilities. As you say, the situations in the Middle East and the Soviet Union are cause for concern. Now, of course, Iraq does not have any nuclear weapons, and the big debate is whether within the next few years they might have one nuclear weapon too heavy to carry anywhere. That's the issue there. But you could see a scenario in which the United States attacks Iraq, or Kuwait, and Iraq considers that an attack on Iraq. As Mr. Aziz has recently said, Iraq would then attack Israel, and now Israel, we know, has somewhere between 100 and 200 nuclear weapons, and then you could see a very serious set of circumstances following.
Our guest is Dr. Carl Sagan of Cornell University, and you mentioned to me early before the show starts that your famous Cosmos series is coming back.
Yes, nice of you to mention it. Videotape sets of it are in the stores, but later this year on the Turner Broadcasting System, a revised and updated version will be shown.
Okay. Now, what's the one thing? And I should add, you still live in Ithaca, correct?
Yeah,
up in upstate New York.
I teach at Cornell University.
Okay.
Despite
everything
cold
else
weather and
that
the
you do.
isolation.
What's the one single thing that worries you the most about this whole situation?
I would have to say the recalcitrance of the United States. It's painful to say, but you look at a set of issues about nuclear arms reductions, a comprehensive test ban treaty which is being discussed at the United Nations today. Dozens of countries all over the world are urging it to be done. Soviet Union says they're for it. Who's against it? The United States, despite the fact that we have tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. You look at issues of demerving nuclear weapons. That is, right now we have many weapons, the MX, for example, many missiles which have 10 warheads on a single missile. At a time of crisis, there's a temptation to preempt. If those guys can destroy 10 of my cities with one of their rockets, let me destroy their rocket before it is launched. It's unstable on both sides. The Soviets also are merved up the gazoo. Look at issues of massive cuts in the nuclear arsenals, not just the start 30%, but 99%. That's where we ought to be looking. Who's the recalcitrant partner? Which nation is the one that's not interested in it at all? It's the United States. I'm very concerned that the United States is stuck in some kind of Cold War freezer and hasn't come to grips with the kind of world we're now in.
Okay, let's go to the phones. Detroit, Michigan, you're on the air.
Hello, Mr. Sagan. Dr. Sagan, how are you doing? My question has to deal with the science education, public school students here in Detroit.
Right.
You know, I happened to go into my child's science room, and I found that there were no test tubes, there were no Erlenmeyer flasks, beakers, all gone. They were using outmoded equipment in the science room, and yet we are demanding our children to be literate in both science and math. And you see the terrible inadequacies in these classrooms, not only here in Detroit, but all over the country. And yet we hear of a commitment from the Department of Education and from our government that we have an education president, but yet it has not trickled down, as I say, to our basic, into our elementary schools.
I agree.
And yet we're here, you know, we talk about, particularly with minorities, students being deficient in science and math, and getting them into the healthcare professions. And you know, how can you do this how can we encourage more minorities into the healthcare professions when, in fact, you look at the basic training in elementary school is so pitiful?
Well, I'm very sympathetic to what you just said, and can I spend a couple of minutes on sort of expanding this? The consequences of being rotten in science education are very serious. First of all, there's the question of dwindling economic competitiveness. Industries in which the United States used to be world leader are trickling away to other countries. New industries, cutting-edge technologies are being developed in other countries much more than in the United States. And this has powerful and progressive economic consequences. I mean, progressively negative economic consequences for the United States. And beyond that, people who understand science are able to influence the future in a way that people who don't understand science can't do. You can elect representatives and influence legislation in a way that you can't do if you don't understand what the issues are. And so many of the issues facing us for the future are connected with science and technology. So where are the failings? You give standardized tests to American kids and kids from lots of other nations, not just Japan and Korea, but Singapore and Canada and England. And you find the United States, let's say junior high school kids, are in the bottom 10% of the world. You find that that applicants for entry-level jobs at leading American electronics company, 80% of them can't pass a 5th grade mathematics test. So this is extremely serious for reasons of our national well-being. Now, the failings are on many levels. The fact that so many high school teachers of chemistry and physics are the coach, the basketball coach, the football coach, is a clear indication of that we're not doing something. School bond issues are routinely not passed, so the schools don't have money to buy the laboratory equipment that you see missing. The teachers are not as good as they ought to be. Or take another issue. Almost every newspaper in America has a daily astrology column. Astrology, of course, is a hoax. It's fake. It's bunk. How many of them have even a weekly science column? Take television. Is there any program on television in which the hero is someone dedicated to finding out how the universe works? Where are the role models in science? When's the last time we heard an intelligent comment about science, not medicine, not technology, science, from the President of the United States? When's the last time we heard science discussed on an evening news program? Science, not technology, not medicine. This problem runs all the way through the society and is very worrisome. Of course it can be fixed, but it's going to take money and a change in attitudes to do it.
Let's go to Los Angeles for our next call. Go right ahead.
Hello. I'm a first-time caller, and thank you so much for C-SPAN. Dr. Sagan, it seems to me that all things are connected, according to John Muir there, and I believe him. And that population increase is our very worst underlying problem. I wonder how you think it could be controlled, and what would be the result? What would be the other side of the coin of curtailing such a basic drive?
Well,
Thank you.
To Very good question, and if I may say, very nicely put. You can't force people not to have children. I mean, it's inhuman at the most fundamental level, and also I think it's very hard to do, except if you're willing to accept totalitarian system. But there is a little known but extremely important fact, and that is that when the per capita income, when the amount of money people make gets above a certain very pitifully low level, they voluntarily reduce the population growth. So let me now come back to that issue in a little more detail. As the world population continues to increase exponentially or nearly exponentially, all the sorts of environmental problems we were talking about before get worse, because the more people there are, the more fossil fuels get burned, the more greenhouse gases and all the rest of it. The more people there are, the more competition for resources there is, the more human misery, the more likelihood of war. It's a very serious issue, as are so many of the things we've been talking about on this program, all having to do with the growth in our technology. Now, if you ask people in the developing world, that's where the problem is, that's where the greatest growth rate is, why do you have so many kids? Don't you know you can't support them? The answer you get back is extremely telling. It's something like this. The kids require very little financial investment. You don't have to send them to school. Nobody goes out to the store to buy clothes for them. And they're useful. They can gather wood, they can gather water, they can help on the scrabbly farm or whatever it is. And most important, if you have lots of kids, then maybe one of them will survive into adulthood and take care of you in your old age, because there's no social security. It's a way, having lots of kids is a way to ensure the parents' old age. Now, all over the world, East and West, Buddhist and Catholic, former communist and capitalist countries, all over, when the income rises above a certain minimum level, the population growth rate takes a steep dive, and that's because now there is enough to take care of your old age. The only exceptions are countries in which the status of women is so low that they are effectively slaves and have nothing to say about how many children they should have. So, what can we do? We can help raise the standard of living of the billion poorest people on the planet, not by handouts, not by giving them fish, say, but by giving them fish hooks, by helping to achieve economic self-sufficiency. And that is very much in our interest, as well as being the kind of activity that every one of the great religions urges on us.
Yes, good evening, Mr.
Hello.
Good evening, Mr. Gately and Dr. Sagan. I would like to say to you, Dr. Sagan, that I feel lucky to be living on the same planet as you. And the questions I have are, when did you first become so interested in astronomy? And also, would you have any advice? Maybe you've just been talking about this, about high school children and grade school children, and especially high school children. Would you have any advice for kids who just aren't so crazy about even staying in school? And one other thing, I was wondering, you know about Noah and Noah's Ark. Did he do everything himself, or did he have his wife there? Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Now, those are three very different questions. I'm not sure I'm going to remember them all. Let me start with Noah. The story of Noah's Ark is, of course, a story. The books of the various great religions, Buddhist, Hindu, Islamic, Jewish, Christian, and many others, are filled with stories. That doesn't mean we are to interpret them literally. And there are all sorts of problems with the Noah's Ark story, one of which is kangaroos. How did the kangaroos get to Australia, if you literally believed the story of Noah's Ark? So I'm sure you meant that in a light tone, and my response is likewise. How to keep kids in school? Well, kids, I believe, are fundamentally very smart. And if they see school being taught by people who themselves are not interested in it, people who cannot do very well at teaching, if what they're being taught has no practical application, then why should they do it? So, for example, there's an awful lot of kids graduating high school who go into entry-level jobs in the service economy, waiting on tables, slinging hash, and so on. Now, do they get more money if they were good in second-year algebra? The answer is no. And they understand that. If there were more jobs that required this kind of education, there would be more kids who would go into that kind of education with some enthusiasm. If there were a connection between how well you did in school and how fast your salary increased later, as there is in many countries, kids would be much more interested.
Macon, Georgia, you're next.
Dr. Sagan,
Yes.
I look forward to seeing your articles in Parade magazine on Sundays when you have them. I think they're wonderful. And a few months back, you had a very courageous and I thought sane article about the practice of abortion. And I would hope that I would like to have you expound on your views a little bit. And secondly, although I have an engineering degree, I have no teaching credentials. I have no master's. But I'd like to know what I could do to help educate children. I have a fairly good general science background, and I'd like to think there's something I could do to spread the knowledge a little bit.
Well, I think that's an awfully good point. I think there are lots of people in this country, retired people looking for something useful to do, people much younger who are willing to spend some of their time to try to help educate kids. And unfortunately, many school boards and state departments of education require something, to my mind, it seems very strange. You don't have to know your subject. You just have to have taken courses in how to teach. And that seems to me backwards. If you know your subject well, and you're enthusiastic about it, then you know how to teach. Now, of course, there are problems about classroom discipline and all of that, which and various school board bureaucracy things, which you have to learn. But I think there ought to be a way, and some school districts permit it, for people who are experts in their subject but haven't gotten a bachelor's degree in education to do some teaching. Certainly some enrichment is possible. And I would just urge you to talk to your local school board and see what you can do. On the abortion issue, it's a complex and, of course, highly divisive issue. The article that my wife Andrienne and I wrote in Parade attempted to steer a middle course between those who say that abortion is murder at any age of the embryo or fetus, and those who say that any restriction on when you can have an abortion is a deprivation of the fundamental rights of the mother. And we were trying to argue, and I believe we made a reasonably good case, that you cannot be at either end of that spectrum and be consistent with the science, that you have to choose a place somewhere in the middle, a difficult but I think essential compromise.
Our next call is from Washington State. Go right ahead.
Hello, Dr. Sagan.
Hi.
I'd like to ask you more on the test ban treaty. I've never found a political issue that had more agreement from all ends of the spectrum, that I don't know anybody who knows why we should be continually detonating nuclear devices underneath the planet and such. I wonder if you could tell a little more on that, and whether I've also been told by some somewhat outlandish sources that there's a possibility that the destruction of the ozone layer can be related to that. And one further point I'd like to ask about, do you have any reaction to the book by Howard Blum, Out There, in the extraterrestrial question? Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We got test ban, we have ozone, and we have UFOs. That's a good menu. Okay, on the idea of a test ban, 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union signed an agreement barring nuclear testing in the atmosphere, in space, and in the oceans. The only place left to blow them up is in holes dug underground. So dutifully, the two countries went and have exploded roughly 1,000 nuclear weapons each underground to develop new nuclear weapons. So underground testing of nuclear weapons has become a prime driver of the arms race. Because if you can't develop new nuclear weapons, if you're not permitted to explode them, then you might not be confident in what you've devised, and that might just pull the rug out from under the arms race. Now, the United States committed in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to make massive cuts, along with the Soviet Union, in its arsenals, and that was the quid pro quo, so that other countries would not develop nuclear weapons at all. The United States and the Soviet Union are in flagrant violation of that treaty. And it's very hard for American diplomats to go to other countries and say, listen, it's bad to develop nuclear weapons, because those other countries say, where do you come off telling us what to do? You're in violation of your own treaty. So these two issues are very serious. The Soviets have urged us to make a comprehensive test ban treaty. This week at the United Nations, 70 nations are getting together to urge the United States and the Soviet Union to stop. The Soviets say, we'd love to stop if the Americans will do so. The Americans say, no way. I think that is not to the credit of the United States. On tests depleting the ozone layer, no evidence whatever. What's depleting the ozone layer is chlorofluorocarbons. The DuPont brand name is Freons, and we are phasing them out all over the planet. And on UFOs, I would just say no one would be happier than me if we were being visited, and it would save me so much trouble. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I would say the evidence that we are now or ever have been visited, despite the claims of being abducted and God knows what happens on the spaceship, those claims are crummy. The evidence just isn't good, and my mind is open. I'm willing to look at new cases, but there has been no compelling cases, physical evidence, photographs, a stolen logbook of the alien captain, nothing that would convince a skeptic.
Let's go to Appleton, Wisconsin. You're on the air.
Yes, I have a couple questions concerning the environment. Although the chances of a space probe like Galileo hitting the Earth and causing plutonium release is very small, I think the consequences are very severe. And I want to ask the guest, how does that square with your environmental support and pushing for this type of fuel in this type of vehicle? And the second question is basically, don't we need to consider changing some form of our economic organization if we're going to impact the environment? Because a lot of things are done for profit. I used to consume a lot of soda water, and I used to use returnable bottles. It was cheaper, it tasted better than aluminum cans, and I liked it. But it wasn't my decision that ended that, and we got aluminum cans as a result, and a lot more pollution, I think, with disposable bottles. I'd like the guest to comment on that. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, on the plutonium issue, a spacecraft going to the outer solar system beyond the orbit of Mars can't use big solar panels to convert sunlight into electricity, because you're so far from the sun that there isn't enough sunlight. So if you wish to go there and do any kind of exploration, you need some self-contained power source, and so-called radioisotope thermoelectric generators are the proven technology. Now, they do involve plutonium. And if plutonium were ground down to a very fine powder, microgram size particles, and it was breathed in, you can produce serious cancers in a lot of people, maybe hundreds or thousands with the Galileo plutonium amount. But there is no plausible scenario in which the spacecraft would fail in a way that would pulverize it. What would happen is you'd spray lumps, and even if you ate the lump, it would do you almost no harm at all. So in all these cases, you want to compare the cost with the benefit. And the potential cost here, compared to the potential benefit, in my opinion, goes on the side of the benefit. In another case, it might go on the side of the cost dominating. On the question of is the profit motive the end-all and be-all and nothing may touch it? Of course not. And even in this country, with its capitalist free enterprise tradition, there are antitrust laws, there are laws preventing the exploitation of children, there are all sorts of restrictions on the profit motive. And where the profit motive gets in the way of the public well-being, there will be further restrictions on the profit motive, certainly. So I don't think that is fundamentally, I mean, in principle, an issue. But where you draw the line is very much debatable, and I agree with you. I think there are cases, petroleum spills, for example, Exxon Valdez, and so on, in which the line has been drawn so that the profit motive has too much leeway, and we ought to tighten it up.
Go down to Port Richey, Florida. You're on the air.
Good evening, Dr. Sagan. I admire you very much. I've expect to have all your, whatever you said on tape, plus your spaceship world, or whatever, really everything, practically everything. My question is, you talked about the education for our children. Now, I've heard often enough on TV, often in newspapers, that children from foreign countries, say from Japan, Taiwan, from anywhere, they really are eager to learn. And my opinion is our children here, they have no interest in it. Mostly baseball, football, or whatever what else they have. They are not interested in learning. What I think is there is no discipline among them. Now, when I went to school, I'm 67 years old. When I went to school and I didn't learn, I had the teacher battered me covered behind the ears, so I had to learn. And that's the way it is. My second question is about the ozone layer. Like I said, with the ozone, what we have up in the air, is it there for steady, or will it deplete in due time if nothing is used anymore? And will it just vanish and everything will be as it used to be?
Okay, thanks. On how well kids of Asian origin are doing in the American school system, there's no question. They're doing phenomenally well. And I think the reason is reasonably clear. These are, some of them, of course, are graduate students from the People's Republic of China, and they'll go back or they'll stay here. But a large number of them are first or second generation Americans. And they come from poor families, but with a tradition of learning, that is, of respect for learning. And so the parents play a fundamental and vital role in encouraging, or in some cases requiring, the kids to learn. They make them or encourage them to take extra kinds of school afterwards, to spend lots of time on homework. I know cases where the parents stay up late at night to serve the kids tea while the kid is doing the homework. Parental support, parents willing to sacrifice so the kids will learn, is vital. And the idea is that if you're educated, if you do well, you have a passport out of poverty. That's why they're doing well. And I say more power to them, and a lot of other people could learn from them. I don't believe, however, that you can hit the kid with a baseball bat and make him or her learn that way. By the way, on baseball, I find it very strange that we've arranged things so that young men who play football or basketball or baseball have a coterie of attractive young women who jump up and down in skimpy outfits and cheer them for doing well in these sports, whereas young men and young women who do well in science or mathematics or geography or history don't have some coterie of cheerleaders who compliment and praise and support them. Is it really in our interest to have the support in the direction of sports and not in the rest of it? Why aren't there sports jackets with the school letter for people who do well in science? And on the ozone question, the ozone is being depleted by this chemical CFCs. Once we stop producing the CFC, then the ozone layer will heal itself. But the trouble is that it takes 100 years to do it. So 2-3 generations from now, people will still be living in a planet which has a depleted ozone layer because we were careless in our time.
We have time for one more call in this segment. Let's go out to Tucson, Arizona. You're on C-SPAN.
Yes, good evening, Dr. Sagan. I'm trying to promote an idea which I call DMZ 2000, and I'd like your opinion on what it would take for people to come, for countries to come to the rational realization that it's in everybody's interest to, say, start reducing their arms spending and their militaries by like 10% every year or every few years until we get down to zero, and then all the countries will be both economically and militarily more secure, and there will be hope for the world that we can start addressing these other problems.
Thanks. Well, I don't think it's practical to get down to zero because, after all, there's always the prospect of some one nation that doesn't want to play this game and that wants to use muscle to intimidate others, and some degree of force may well be necessary. But to make major cuts in arms worldwide, I think is a first-class idea. The human species spends $1 trillion a year on arms. The Cold War has cost the United States $10 trillion. What could you buy for $10 trillion? The answer is you could buy everything in the United States. I mean everything except the land. All the highways, skyscrapers, homes, cars, trucks, boats, babies, diapers, everything in the United States for $10 trillion. And likewise the Soviets. So I say we've done something phenomenally stupid. The Cold War is dumb. And the present precarious state of the American and Soviet economies has something to do with that. And all you have to do is look at the thriving economies of places like Japan and Germany that didn't spend money on the Cold War, and you can see what the consequences have probably been.
Dr. Sagan's latest book is A Path Where No Man Thought, Nuclear Winter and an End to the Arms Race. And I might add that your book, Cosmos, was the best-selling science book ever published in the English language. And we look forward to Cosmos returning later in the year on TV.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.